Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Will Jones, and this is the Logos and Polos podcast number 2. Uh, Tonight with special guest, Coach Michael Fly. Um, and before I introduce Coach Fly and give him a chance to make sure he's on, before I introduce him, just want to give everybody just a brief background on, the reason for the podcast, Logos and Polos kind of explores the ups and downs of coaching, corporate jobs, teaching jobs, and being a part of teams for a long time, corporation universities, and just kind of exploring the identities that we have as it relates to who we are with that logo on our chest, and then who we are without the logo on our chest. I know many of us go through our careers and represent universities. If you're a coach or if you're a employee working for, a corporate America, you go around and everywhere you go, you represent whatever that logo is that's on your chest. And we want to be able to make sure we know who we are outside of our professional resumes. And do we have our personal resumes up to date? I think that is big as we continue to track through our careers and not forget who we are outside of the profession that we represent. Because if we tie our self-worth to our careers, everything that's successful and all the failures that we have will directly affect our self-worth. And we want to make sure we protect our self-worth as we track through our careers. And so, let's talk a little bit about our guest tonight, a really good friend of mine, a 16-year coaching vet at both the collegiate and professional level. Coach Fly right now is in his first season at Mizzou with Dennis Gates as the team's director of scouting and analytics. They had a big-time win last night, a top 10 win. Congratulations to the Mizzou Tigers. But prior to Mizzou, Coach Fly was a head coach at Florida Gulf Coast State University from 2018 to 2022. And during that tenure, he helped lead the Eagles to the third most single season wins in program history, with 22 during the 2021-22 campaign. And outside of that time, Coach helped build that Florida Gulf Coast program from the bottom up, from the ground floor up. And he was a part of that legendary Dunk City team that made it to the Sweet 16 with that Cinderella run. We had a chance to compete against each other when we both were assistant coaches at Jacksonville University in a very, very talented Atlantic Sun Conference. Coach Fly, you there, man? What's going on?
Coach Jones, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, man. Doing good. How's the family? How's everybody doing?
Family's great, and I just want to say to anybody listening, and this is a credit to Coach Jones, Coach Warren, and his staff, unless you were following the ASUN at that time, we were very fortunate to even be able to get out of the league with how good you guys were at Jacksonville and how good the league was in general. So I think there could have been multiple teams that made that run, but we were very fortunate. And family's good, man, and I'm excited to be on tonight.
And, you talk about major leagues at that time, man, it was an unbelievable time. Belmont was there for a couple of years. Mercer beat Duke the following year after you guys went to the Sweet 16. I mean, it was a big time league at that point.
Man, just mentioning some of those teams, Coach Jones, you're about to make me break out in hives and start twitching, thinking about the way those guys kept me up at night.
There was some outstanding coaches in that league at that time, and actually the league is doing well now with the kind of new crop of teams. But glad to have you on, Coach, and want to kind of break the ice as people continue to log on. And this first question will kind of get the ice going a little bit, break the ice a little bit, Coach. You've been a lot of different places, a lot of different levels. Tell me, how many different logos have you represented in your career?
So that was a great question, and one that I had to spend a little time when, it seems like it wasn't that long ago. But when you break it down, I've had 6 logos on my chest at different times: Georgetown College, an NAIA school, the Charlotte Bobcats, and the NBA. I was actually with the NCAA national office for a year, Florida State University, Florida Gulf Coast, and now University of Missouri. So I'm at 6 total at this point.
Man, 6 logos, man, and you probably got boxes in your stores if you're like me with all of these different polos and different logos and colors. It's just a part of the life that we live as coaches, right?
That's right. There's always that, you're trying to figure out what are you going to keep, what are you going to get rid of, and I still haven't figured out what to do with those things, but yes, they are probably not for the happiness of my parents' sake, but most of them in my attic at my home in Kentucky that we got to figure out what to do with at some point.
When you do I always, when I was on staff, I always wanted to do the gear, and year after year, you got to have some gear that the guys are gonna love. So even when you're leaving the school, when you put that energy into creating, outfit or what the look is going to be for that year, you don't even want to give nothing up, even though you're going to another job.
No question. I had a lot to sort through after 11 years, obviously, in Fort Myers. So some of those were some bittersweet choices, but got through that one as well.
Tell me about, we were talking about polos and combinations. Tell me, which one of those color combos that you like, man, when you got up in the morning, you're about to go recruiting, man, and tell me which one of those outfits made you really, really feel good.
That's a great question that I'll probably respond to, and we'll talk about, being younger and maybe not quite as wise as you and I might be now, but when I was 23 years old, I believe, and working with the Charlotte Bobcats, you couldn't tell me anything, man, because I felt like I had the world by the tail. I was working in the NBA at the time, and unfortunately for them, it hasn't gone this way, but it was a newer franchise. Michael Jordan was getting involved with ownership. So I thought, Coach Jones, I had the world figured out. I said, man, I'm going to get on the ground floor of Michael Jordan. Life couldn't be better, and I learned a hard lesson that sometimes you do everything in your power and it doesn't work out. As Jordan bought the franchise and gained total control, we actually were all out of a job. So it was a good lesson at 23, but you couldn't tell me anything, man, when I was 23 years old and walking into an NBA office every day.
Hey, man, I bet. And, obviously, anytime you can route that Jordan logo or have any type of affiliation with the Jordan brand, it gives you that feeling of being on top of the world. Now, Coach, you graduated from Kentucky, right?
Correct.
Now, tell us about your time a little bit there at Kentucky.
Well, it was an interesting time in my life because I joke with people that know me growing up. I was a good player, good high school player. I'm about 5'10". I'm still waiting on the growth spurt. I'm still waiting on the call from Kentucky, Louisville, Murray State, Western Kentucky. It still hasn't come. So I ended up going to Kentucky just as a normal student. I had some really smaller Division III, Division II schools recruit me. Ended up just going to Kentucky and being a student, and really missed it after a couple of years and just felt like, man, I gotta get back involved with the game. So I actually went to the equipment manager at Kentucky. His name was Bill Kitely, who's a legend in the state. He's got a Maker's Mark bottle with his face on it. He was literally there with Adolph Rupp, with Coach Pitino, Coach Smith, Coach Sutton, all those guys through the years, Coach Hall. So he was a legend there. And he laughed at me when I came in his office and asked him if I could be a manager at Kentucky, and said to me point blank, he said, well, do you know anybody in the governor's office? And I said, no, sir. He said, well, are any of the buildings on campus named after anybody in your family? I said, no, sir. He said, well, are you really close to any McDonald's All-Americans? No, sir. Well, then can't be a manager at Kentucky, but I'll help you. So he picked up the phone and made a phone call to Happy Osborne at Georgetown College, which is an NAIA school. And Coach Osborne let me volunteer there as a student assistant, kind of doing a little bit of everything. So I was going to school at Kentucky, going to classes, living in Lexington, but making the 40-minute commute each day to work at Georgetown and learn how to be a coach.
Did you hit that last question?
I did. I did when I didn't have a logo.
Good.
So
Yep.
I'll
Yep.
touch on that twice. Once was when we got let go with the Charlotte Bobcats. It was the entire staff. Like I said, Jordan had taken over and brought in his own people, which I understand, been through it. So that was a really challenging time for me because I thought I was going to spend my whole career in the NBA, and then all of a sudden I was working in a corporate office at the NCAA. Now I learned a ton of things about sports business, made a ton of connections, but it was really hard for me to not be part of a basketball team and part of the game. So that was a major transition for me, but I was still, around really good people, learning some different things in terms of also, what did I want to do? Did I want to stay in coaching? Did I want to try, administration, sports business? But I found out after about a year that that was not for me in terms of long term. So that was the first time I experienced it, that really wasn't my choice. This last time was obviously much more personal. When it happened in Charlotte, it was our whole staff, and I was an intern basically. When I was fired at FGCU, obviously that was much more personal because I was the CEO. So when I found myself without a logo this March, it was a really disorienting time in terms of, what do I do every day? You're waking up sometimes and you may be able to relate to this, people that have been through it, but is this a bad dream? You're just trying to figure out, what do I do now? Because so much of your life has been defined by that logo, by that title, by that job. So I've experienced a lot of emotions when it comes to being without a logo. And so sometimes that's frustration. I felt with the FGCU situation, even betrayal at times, which we can talk about more later, but learned a lot of really good lessons in terms of starting to try to come to grips with the difference in a job title and your identity. And that's why I think what you're doing in this space is so important.
Yes, I mean, we both, this past fall, spring and fall, dealt with being without a logo and being a part of programs that we helped build, and then had an opportunity to lead a successful campaign as a head coach. And then, one day you realize that you are no longer the head coach of that program. And again, how do you deal with that when you are not the CEO, when you're not the person making decisions or even associated with that program? It's a space that not a lot of us really think is going to happen to us. And it doesn't just happen in coaching, it happens across a lot of different professions. But it's something that I thought that needed to be a space to talk about. And who are we outside of that logo that we represent? So, Coach, that brings me to the next question. Do you think you did a good job of separating your personal identity from your professional identity just throughout your career, and especially now looking back at it while you're in this space?
Well, I would tell you for 16 years, I definitely did not do a good job of that. And this has been one of the real positives of being let go at FGCU. It's given me a whole different time and space to even think about those things. Sometimes when you're climbing, and you and I both were really fortunate to get head coaching jobs, pretty early in our careers and in our lives, you're so focused on the climb and so focused on the job, you're not thinking about, your identity is that. It's that job, or at least it was for me. And what I've been able to understand and learn about myself through a really humbling, a really hard process, was that most of my self-worth as a human being was tied up in that university, that program, that title. And that's why I felt so lost when I was fired. It felt like a death in the family. It felt like the death of my identity. At that point, it felt like the death of my career. So no, I did not do a good job at all for 16 years of separating. For the first time, I can tell you this is the first season that I've been in basketball that I am doing a good job of that now. But I was really forced into this growth. So sometimes, I know I'll look back on that time, and we'll talk about this as we go with some of your other questions, but you see things much differently with hindsight sometimes than you do in the moment.
You hit it on the head, and you know, when you put it in, when you put the time in, especially in a career like college basketball, where the grind is every day, and you're trying to figure out how to help your boss or how to help your program reach the highest level. It's not a 8 a.m., 5 p.m. You're not clocking in and clocking out. You live with it 24 hours a day, and I think that not until you're not working or you're not associated with the program, a lot of assistant coaches or head coaches deal with, like, who are we outside of that job when you don't have that logo to represent. And your personal identity is something that you have to be able to know who you are, without your job title. So a lot of people can't even answer the question about who they are without saying, I'm a head coach or I'm a basketball coach. Well, obviously, we're more than just basketball coaches, and we're more than just CEOs, and we're more than just teachers. We have a personal life that we're dads and mothers and aunts and mentors that are outside of our professional identity. So, looking back, Coach, at being a leader of a program, would you say that you underinvested or overinvested in your job?
Well, Coach Jones, I see a few of my former coworkers in the space that could probably answer that for you. But I definitely overinvested, which I think, especially, I think now guys maybe coming into the business, there's a little more importance and a little more focus, I think, just in the world in general on, you hear terms like self-care, self-help, those type of things. Those weren't things when you and I were coming into the business. And so I would have worn the badge, if you will, of over-investing in my job kind of as a badge of honor, for most of my career. But now that I'm in the space I'm in, I would tell you and anybody listening, yes, I definitely overinvested, and I'll talk a little bit about that. When you are so locked in on that title, that job, and it's coming from a positive place. You want to be successful. You want to impact people's lives in a good way. But I experienced friendships being lost just because I did not think that it was important to put the time into some personal relationships because it wasn't part of growing the program. So I let some really close relationships go by the wayside a little bit because I didn't make time for them. From a personal health and mental health, but just taking care of yourself physically, making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure you're eating right. I kind of took an approach of, hey, I can do all that when I'm older. Right now it's go time. Well, eventually you're older. If you haven't built those habits, then you can run into some problems that I was lucky enough to avoid some. But, I've talked to some friends that are still head coaches and warned them like, hey, man, I was not taking care of myself. You've got to do these things now. I can remember, Will, people asking me, whether it be a conference or, I meet somebody, oh, what are your hobbies? And I used to kind of laugh and say, hobby? And I would say to them, does recruiting count as a hobby? And anybody that knew me at that time in life, that was my hobby, was being on the phone and trying to recruit. And that's not a good answer, just for anyone listening. I would say everything in my life became second priority behind my job, family included, wife and kids. I would not have admitted that at the time, but everything was second priority because it felt like that job I felt like if I had the job, then I could take care of my family. I could take care of my kids, not realizing I probably wasn't being as present with them as I wanted to be. What I've learned through that experience of over-investing, at a high level, what I'm finally doing in year 17, I see some guys on the call that are with me now. I actually said to one of the younger guys, he made a comment to me the other day. He said, Coach Fly, you're leaving the office early. And I turned to him and I said, you're absolutely right. I said, I spent the better part of 16 years in basketball offices. I said, if you need me, call me. I said, Coach Gates knows what I'm working on, but you're right. I'm going to go home and see my kids. And that is what I'll tell you, and I used to say, if I become a head coach again, they now make me at Mizzou say when I become a head coach again, but the job will not get all of me again. The job will get part of me, but there's going to be a Michael Fly outside of that logo the next time around.
Nah, man, you hit it on the head. We've had conversations. You were one of the first persons to hit me up when I lost my job at North Carolina A&T back in August. And when you're going through that space, you start to really analyze some of those things that you talked about. Spending time, over invested in your job, just trying to be the best, and it's coming from a great place. But when you have those situations, the way that lifestyle, it can just take you, and you end up in a place that you don't recognize yourself outside of working for that university and putting it all in for the players or whoever you're representing at that time. And so it's one of those situations where being outside and being on the outside looking in, you have an opportunity to reflect and understand, again, like you said, when we become head coaches again, successful head coaches again, how to manage that and be better the next time around. Coach, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool, perfect. So let's talk about, the other side of the coin. How does that affect you today now, Coach, as you prepare for what's next in your career, this first year out, looking forward to, you kind of touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's just given me a kind of what you just said, given me a much different perspective in that if you're not taking care of yourself, your identity, if you don't, and one thing I've had to examine through this experience is what my value system is. And that may sound easy, or that may sound like something like, oh, yeah, we all know what our value system is. But I did not realize my value system had become wins and losses. My value system had become whether or not people thought I was great at X and O's. My value system had become whether or not boosters liked me. My values had become very much out of whack. Not that I wasn't living in a moral sense, but my value system was completely tied to the job once again. So when your value system is tied only to your job, your sense of worth, your sense of self is also tied completely to that job. So what I'm learning through this year at Missouri and Coach Gates, I say to the staff and to him all the time that I tell them they saved my life. And I really do believe that, because it's given me a space to heal from what was a really traumatic experience for me at FGCU. It's given me a time to take care of myself physically, take care of myself mentally. One thing I would encourage everybody listening that's been just a kind of breath of fresh air and something that I've learned through the process is I lived basically for 16 years, and I think a lot of us do as coaches, but just going from one high to the next. And by that I mean I'm chasing the wins. I'm chasing, did I sign the best player? I'm chasing, did I get the booster to donate the money? And it's one high to the next high to the next high. And when you live like that, it sounds, in comparison, almost like you're talking about drugs. That is really what it's like. You're addicted to those highs, and you forget that the mundane things in life can sometimes bring you the greatest joys. And what I'm learning now at Mizzou is I get up in the mornings, we sit by the fire, which, you didn't have that in Florida. So that's a silver lining. We sit by the fire. I have coffee with my kids. I work out every day. We're invested. We do meal prep stuff now, making sure we're eating as healthy as possible. We go on family walks. We go hiking. We do things now as a family that never even would have, my idea of time with our family before was, hey, Heather, we got to get the boys dressed in blue and green so we can go to this event. We got to get the boys to this other, we got to go to the soccer game so everybody can see it. So my life and my value system has changed so much. I will be in a much better place mentally, physically. I will be a better head coach because I'll be more prepared to attack every day without my entire being consumed with wins and losses, keeping the AD happy, keeping the boosters happy. It's just, that's no way to live when you really step back and see it, for what it is. So this has just been an unbelievable time for me. And I'm sure you've learned things about yourself in this space too, that, neither one of us on the climb, you don't stop to think about things like your values and things like, okay, what makes me happy outside of signing a recruit or winning a game? So it's really been a beautiful space for me when, again, if you told me that 8 months ago, I would have laughed you out of the room.
You hit it on the head. You're coming up on the climb, and I'm worried about, somebody lets me know that Mike Fly he's in Jacksonville. Well, what's Fly doing in Jacksonville? Who is he coming to see in Jacksonville?
No doubt. Same with you.
I need to make sure I figure out who he's here to see. And like you said earlier, being young head coaches, having the opportunity to be head coaches at a young age, having a chance that next time to be better and to have all of these things that we learned before, coupled to this new life, this new understanding of how to navigate, will definitely make us better as head coaches. And it's kind of like you said, I said it earlier, this statement that we all need to kind of remember. If we tie our self-worth, to our careers, the successes, which Coach talked about, those drugs, and the failures. So those bad times also will directly affect our self-worth. So, the good times, sometimes let the good times roll, like everything's going well, signing good players, winning games, people are saying good things about me. And you're walking on the top of the world, and then it could shift to where, man, nobody's saying good things about me. We're losing games. I just lost my job. Am I a good coach? What are people saying about me? Those are the things that you judge yourself on. And mentally, that's not who you are. That's just what you do, and that's the part that we have to make sure that we protect ourselves from. And so,
no question.
Coach, what are some things you would say to the group, to the people listening? What are some of the things we should all ask ourselves as we continue to grow in our profession? And you kind of touched on it a little bit. What are some of the things you think we should ask ourselves as we grow?
So I'll tell you, I'm going to give you a couple of things in terms of just things that I've really, in this time, since being fired and now coming into a completely different role. But something my dad would say to me when I was growing up that used to drive me crazy at the time. But, he would say, every day you have a choice. You've got a choice. You can live your life negative today, or you can live your life positive today. And try to enjoy today, no matter what the situation is. And I used to get so frustrated with him and say, yeah, Dad, I got it, but I got this big thing. And so now that's really honestly how I try to approach it. Like, okay, let me, and I know there's some staff members from the zoo on here. I've had so many great experiences in terms of, an unbelievable, most people don't get to spend 11 years at one institution. I was there 11 years, had some wonderful experiences, being able to pour into the guys here at Mizzou now they're on their climb. And I joke with them all the time. I'll grab them and say, have you done something today that brings you joy? And they kind of look at me. I'm like, I'm not talking about basketball. Have you done something today that brings you joy? So that would be one. I'm going to share some other things, and I know you're going to get to them. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm going to share some quotes actually from a book that I've read, Will, that that has really helped me. And I think we had talked about that a little bit, but I'm going to give you the title first of all, and you're going to laugh at the title. but we're all adults here. It's not what you think it is. The author of the book is Mark Manson. The title of the book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FUCK. It's not what you think it is. It's not a book about, throwing your life away or not caring. But I'm going to share a couple of quotes that have been so helpful to me in the last year of my life. So I'm just going to give you a few, and then we can discuss them a little bit. But I talked about this a little bit, but one of the quotes is, highs are shallow and unproductive ways to go about one's life. And like I talked about, that was really the way I was living my life, based on wins, losses, recruiting battles. That's where I was getting all my value. So that one really hit home with me. I'm going to give you another one. What is objectively true about your situation is not as important as how you come to see the situation, how you choose to measure and value it. So no matter what your situation is, you are the one that chooses the metrics of what success is, what success isn't. I'm going to keep going here because, again, I just finished reading it, and again, it's been terrific. If you want to change how you see your problems, you have to change what you value and how you measure failure or success. So again, if your values are completely tied to that title, your job, your salary, whatever that might be, then if that ever goes away, for whatever reason it goes away, you're going to be in a dark place. And that was part of what I was dealing with. Often the same event can be good or bad depending on the metric we choose to use. So again, I looked at the time being fired at Florida Gulf Coast as the worst thing that could ever happen to me, and I'd never be a head coach again. And, I felt like I'd done everything in my power every waking hour to make the place successful. But now with some space and some time, it's my choice to be able to say, well, was that a good event or a bad event based on the way it changed my value system and changed my life? The people that know me well, I wouldn't be taking care of myself physically right now if I was still the head coach there. I wouldn't be spending time with my kids. I wouldn't be mentoring the guys here at Mizzou. So as much as it hurt, as painful as it was, I'm choosing to measure now the situation, the event, based on, my life now. This might be the biggest one, Will, and I know I'm hitting you with a lot, but you asked. Nobody else is ever responsible for your situation but you. Many people may be to blame for your unhappiness, but nobody is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. Now, that's a lot to say. And when you get fired as a head coach, there's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. You can feel betrayed. You can be bitter. You can feel like people that you trusted let you down. Whatever you want to think, there's truths to every side. But no matter what happens, whether you get fired in your job, and it may not be in basketball, whatever it is, you may get fired because you did something that was definitely deserved of being fired. You may get fired because there's a judgment call and somebody makes a decision. But whatever the reason is, it's nobody's job but your own to find happiness again. It's only your responsibility. And when I started to take that stance, Will, and said, you know what? Did I think that it was fair that I got fired with 22 wins? No, I didn't. Did I agree with the situation? No, vehemently disagreed. But all that happened. It's not in my control. It's not something that I can change. So I can be bitter about it. I can be mad about it. I can continue to wallow in that, or I can say, okay, yes, that happened, but how am I going to use that event to find happiness again and be happy again? And how am I going to turn that event into a positive? And when you start to tell yourself, it's my responsibility, my happiness is my responsibility, it really changes your perspective on what may or may not have, quote unquote, happened to you.
Man, I hope you guys wrote some things down. I'm telling you, I wrote some things down. And Coach Fly, it's so crazy. 5 months ago, I can see the growth already in you, in terms of just being in a better space, in terms of dealing with the change, the pivot that we both are making right now. And that last quote, it's funny how it happens. It basically was what your dad was telling you. Every day you have a choice. Every day as individuals, we have a choice to decide if we're going to be positive about a situation or negative about a situation, regardless of who made a judgment call, deserving, undeserving, right or wrong. We have a choice to live our lives. The sun's going to come up, and we got to make sure that we protect ourselves and making the choice to be positive a lot of the times about the situation. That doesn't mean that we're not human. We're going to be mad. We're going to get mad on certain things. We're going to be overjoyed on certain things, but it kind of goes back to, not being too high, not being too low. Kind of like we tell our players, we tell our, we're going through this battle. We don't want to get too high when things are going well, and we don't want to get too low when things are going bad, because we have a choice. That next play, we always say the next play. Let's try to win that next play. If we lived our lives like that, let's try to win that next play. But see, in basketball, you don't have time. That next play is right away. And in some other sports, you got time to wait. You got time to process it. In basketball, you got to keep moving, and you got to be able to move on to that next possession with a positive mindset so that you can be successful. Before we go into the next segment, I want to recognize our first sponsor of the podcast, Will and Well, which is a new build, your own salad preparation business that's coming to the Raleigh-Durham area. And the owners are Ponce Tidwell and Rosalind Mitchell, who are tuned in with us tonight. We appreciate your sponsorship and helping us make this podcast successful. And I call this segment, the last media timeout. We'll kind of run through these questions, Coach, kind of put you in the hot seat a little bit, and kind of get some answers for our listeners. The first question would be, why did you become a coach?
That's a great question. I'll give you my multi-part answer. I've been obsessed with the game since I can remember, probably to an unhealthy point, which probably gets into some of the identity stuff that we talked about. But I loved it growing up from the state of Kentucky. Couldn't get enough of it. I tried a bunch of different things, and I would encourage everybody on the call. I mean, at different points in my life when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, I ran a small business when I was in my early 20s. I wrote for a website. I interned at a marketing and PR firm. I interned in the NBA. I interned at the NCAA. I tried a bunch of things, and what I liked the most was being part of a basketball program. I also wanted to impact lives, which I think sometimes can get lost, especially as you climb. You start to worry about your next job. You start to worry about, how much money you're making, your contract status. You can never lose the sight of trying to make sure you're impacting guys' lives in a positive manner. And that's one thing that I tried to do during my 11 years at FGCU. And now that I'm at Mizzou, that's one thing I try to pour into our players, because I don't have, the same responsibilities I've always had. So I've got even more time to pour into those guys. So that's something that was important to me in terms of impacting. I wanted to be on a college campus. I like the variety of being in practice, but yet going to something on campus to support somebody else, to meeting with a booster, I like doing things like this in terms of going on radio shows or podcasts. And that was one thing, again, through self-discovery, by trying different things. I didn't love in the NBA the monotony of it was all basketball. That was it. I wanted the variety that comes with college. So those are the reasons. What probably pushed me over the edge, I got hurt in college and had to have a minor surgery one time. I was home for about 2 weeks, and I read a book called My Life on a Napkin by Rick Majerus. And I said to myself, you know what, man? I'd like to live in a hotel someday and coach basketball. And I didn't end up living in the hotel, but I did end up coaching basketball. So that's the multi-part answer to why I became a coach.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Next question. Best advice you ever received?
Yeah, I'm going to give you probably two on that. I talked about my dad and talking about positive choices every day. I'm going to share something that Andy Enfield said to me throughout my tenure as a head coach and told me the day I got fired as well. And something that Dennis Gates says to our players all the time. But, you know, Coach Enfield and I used to talk very regularly. He followed us really closely at FGCU. He was a big supporter of not just myself, but, you know, he still had relationships there, our AD there. He was rooting for us all the time. So he would call me after losses more than wins, but said this the day I got fired too. He said, you know, did you give that program everything that you could possibly give it? And I said, Coach, I said, literally everything. He goes, okay, well, did you do your absolute best? I said, yeah, absolutely. He said, then you should be able to put your head on the pillow every night and feel good about yourself. Just because you're not the head coach there anymore doesn't mean you didn't do a good job. And again, getting back to the metrics of success, whether you're successful or not depends on whose metrics you're using. That's something Coach Gates says to our players all the time, you know, and he's so emotionally intelligent with this. You know, we can lose a really tough game and he'll say, all I ask is that you give your absolute best. All I ask is that you give your very best. And that sounds simplistic, but that's something that is really, if you really, really lock into that and really believe that, ask yourself, am I giving my absolute best? And if you are, then put your head on the pillow and you should feel good about it. The other thing I'm going to give you from my wife, Heather Fly, one thing I've struggled with at different times in my career and my life to some extent, but especially my career, is I wanted everybody to like me. I was always so busy trying to make sure everyone in the administration liked me, the boosters liked me, the beat writers liked me. I always wanted everybody to say, man, he's a great guy, or man, he took time out for me. And so when people didn't like me, and sometimes someone not liking you is totally out of your control. They might not like you because you signed a recruit they wanted. They might not like you because they wanted somebody else to get the job you got. They may not like you because you went to Kentucky and they went to Louisville. You know, who knows what it is. But Heather would say to me throughout my tenure, especially as a head coach, everyone's not going to like you, and that's okay. And that may sound simple, but there were people that the day I did my press conference at Florida Gulf Coast had a problem with me, or now our relationship changed. And that had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with however they felt about me getting that job. So I learned to be okay with people not liking me as long as I was trying to do the right thing and I liked myself, to be quite frank.
Man, great advice. Great advice. I mean, I can feel exactly where you're coming from, Coach Enfield's advice, and then also, you know, from your wife, just because those are some of the things you definitely deal with being in that chair as a head coach. Coach, what are some of the habits? You know, people out here listening. You know, being a head coach, first of all, is an unbelievable accomplishment. So then being a successful head coach is icing on the cake. So what are some of the habits that have helped you become a successful head coach?
Well, and I'll take this question, you know, in two parts. I think what helped me both get the job at FGCU and have some success, and I'll be the first one to tell you, we did not have the success that I wanted to have, that I expected to have, for a multitude of reasons, but I still considered the fact that we were able to rebuild the program and get the program back to 20 wins and headed in what I felt like the right direction, you know, was a success, and the guys that we graduated. But I think on the climb, something that Stan Jones used to say to me at Florida State was, no matter where you are, you got to make the big time where you are. And when we first came to Florida Gulf Coast, Coach Enfield and I, you know, now Florida Gulf Coast is a brand name. You know, it's Dunk City. It's, you know, people hear FGCU and they think of winning. And that's not to toot my own horn. That's a testament to the coaches that have been there, the athletic director that's been there, the people that have been there in the community, and the people that love that program. But nobody knew who we were. So from day one, we had to try to treat FGCU just like we did Florida State, you know, just like I saw it at Kentucky. So that was kind of on my climb. I got to treat any program I'm in like it's the biggest, best program in the world. And I used to say to my players, if they would, not take a scout seriously or whatever it might be, if I felt like they disrespected the program, I would say to them, guys, would you do that to Mike Krzyzewski? Would you do that to Bill Self? Would you do that to John Calipari? And they'd say, well, no. Then why would you do it here? Because my point was, this is our Kentucky. This is our Duke, right? So on the climb, it was try to treat the big time where you are. And I just tried to consistently, well, I was not perfect by any means, but I tried to outwork everyone, and I tried to treat everybody as fair as I could treat them. And I wasn't always successful. There were times I was a hothead when I was young, and I laughed looking back on it. So my coworkers have reminded me of that. But I'm going to give you a quote that I think is important for anybody listening to understand. And I think it's a credit to him. But the day I got the head coaching job, there was a lot of questions of, the decision was made quickly. I was named the head coach quickly. And so there was a lot of questions from my athletic director, Ken Cavanaugh. Why did you hire Michael Fly? Was there not a long process? I'll never forget. He said, well, he's been interviewing for this job for 7 years. And that meant the world to me, because what that said was, hey, something I'm doing every day is getting through that people think that I'm capable of doing this job. And it started from me being third assistant to second assistant to top assistant to being able to become the head coach. Once I became a head coach, and this is one thing I'm learning from Coach Gates now, but what I would encourage you to do in your career, whether you're CEO, whatever you might be doing, you're on the climb to go in there, but trying to do the absolute best job you can do while not letting the job consume you to the point that you're not doing the best job that you can do. And that may sound kind of funny, but some of the things I've learned here from Coach Gates, and he'll say, hey, don't let this distract you, whatever might be going on. Hey, we can't catch every raindrop. And by that, he means basketball is not a utopia. No company is a utopia. One thing I struggle with sometimes is I wanted everything in my program to be perfect. I wanted to have a 3.0 GPA, 1,000 on the APR, never lose a game, never have a kid get in trouble. That's not life. And when the utopia doesn't happen the way you want it to, how are you going to react? How are you going to respond? Some of the things that I thought helped us rebuild the program there, I had really good people around me in terms of my staff, in terms of the athletic director who's still there was there with me the whole way through. So we knew each other's strengths and weaknesses in terms of, what to look for and understood the program. But I tried to surround our players with great people. And that is one thing, regardless of wins and losses, I felt like we did a terrific job with. I don't think any of our players would say, oh, well, Coach Fly or that guy in his staff was not a good person, was not a good guy. So if you've got really good people around you, then I think any shortcomings you do have, they fill in those gaps for you. They help you be successful just by being the humans and the people that they are. So those are kind of the both on the climb and then the success that we were able to have. I would tell you those are the things that were important to me, Will.
Those, man, big time answer. I can see it myself clearly in terms of, at A&T, my research there as an assistant, I capitalized on how many championships North Carolina A&T had won, and they were like top 4 mid-major regular season NCAA tournament champions. And that was something that I put out there into the atmosphere to get kids to understand that the program, once upon a time, was highly successful and, was a winner. And that's kind of what I was able to bring back into the program in terms of this is our Kentucky. This is the best place. This is who chose you. You chose us. You need to make this the best place that it can be. And I think, again, it ends with people. with people, and then players surrounding them with the best people around them that can help them be successful and reach their goals. All of that goes into winning. And like you said, that utopia, you want to win. You want to have the highest GPA. You want to have the best recruiting class. You want to have the best highlights. You want to have everything. And a lot of times, like you said, it's not, you may hit lightning in the bottle one time and you may have all those things going right for you, but it's not realistic to have all of those things all the time. And as a staff, as a head coach, as a program, you need to be able to communicate that with your team, whether that's your the people that's working under you, the people that's on your team, to help them understand that yes, you're pushing for greatness, but what does greatness look like consistently? That'll give them a better perspective of how to access the success. This next question, Coach, is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's a fun question. If you could start your career over tomorrow and you had access to all the knowledge you have today, how would you attack your career as a mid-major assistant coach?
That is a great question. It makes me feel a little bit old, but it wasn't that long ago. I would tell you, with hindsight, I would invest in things outside of basketball. I would invest more in personal friendships. I would invest more in my health, both physically and mentally. I would have hobbies. I wouldn't, my answer when people said, what's your hobby, would not be recruiting. This may sound funny, but to the younger coaches that are on here, I skipped almost every wedding of every friend of mine my entire life because I just felt like I was doing the program a disservice by not being there for whatever it might be. Go to your friends' weddings, guys. Don't not go to people's weddings that care about you. The program will be okay for that one day you're not there, that 2 days. And that some of you are probably laughing, but I just started going to weddings again. And you miss, there's not many times in your life that many people that care about each other and care about you are in one room. So don't skip those. There's going to be a million games. There's going to be a million recruiting visits. Go to your friends' weddings. I would approach basketball like any other business. And by that, I mean, when you have opportunities to improve yourself, you need to think seriously about taking them. I think sometimes in basketball, we can get very emotionally tied to a program or a place. I'll give you, some examples of my own experience. I had opportunities to go to USC at one point, to go to a couple other high major programs as assistants, and I turned those down because I was so invested at FGCU and I was so clear on the vision there. And to be quite frank, I felt like the job that Coach Enfield and I had started, and then Coach Dooley and I, wasn't finished. I saw that as a destination job that I was going to be at for 25 or 30 years and hopefully build it into the next Butler, Gonzaga. Now, those are huge goals, but I saw it as a long-term job. I think sometimes you can get too invested, maybe even too comfortable. When I look back on my career, had I taken some of those high major assistant jobs, I maybe could have gotten a job like FGCU anyways after I had those experiences. Because I stayed at FGCU for so long, I've actually had people tell me in the business, yeah, I thought about hiring you at one point, but I knew you were just going to stay at FGCU forever. So I've joked with them now and said, no, always call. So, and I wouldn't change. I got to be a head coach. Again, it's so unique in the business to be able to be somewhere 11 years. But don't treat basketball any different. If you work at a small startup and Google calls you to pay you a lot more money and put you in a position that can potentially make you successful, you need to take a hard look at that versus, no, I know I'm going to chart the path and this is where I'm going to be and this is why. And Will, you and I touched on this. Just because you know a situation at the moment and you feel like you know what's going to happen in the future, things can change that are outside of your control. And I'll give you that example. We'll touch on this, but when Coach Enfield and I came into the ASUN, the league was unbelievable. It was Belmont, it was Mercer, it was South Carolina Upstate was unbelievable at the time. It was East Tennessee State. It was Jacksonville. I mean, it was a bear. And the league changed in the time that I was in the league. And when I was an assistant coach, the league was much different, even than when I was a head coach. When I became a head coach, Liberty, Jacksonville State, Eastern Kentucky, Bellarmine, all these teams come into the league that have different resources at times, different academic standard, whatever it might be, different budgets. So if you lock into a place because you assume, well, this place has always been successful and it always will be, things can change on you. So I would just encourage people on the call, don't stay somewhere just because you assume that it's always going to be that way. Things are constantly changing. Things are constantly evolving. Leagues are changing. When you have opportunities, I'm not saying take an opportunity to take one, but I do think as mid-major assistant specifically, I had somebody tell me this one time ago, once you become a high major assistant, you're stamped as a high major assistant. Whether you really are or not, you've now got that quote unquote stamp of approval, which can allow you to move to some different jobs. So that's probably something that I would tell myself. The other two things I would tell myself is this. This is kind of in the same vein. I had a coach that I was really close with used to tell me 5 and dive. And I'd say, 5 and dive? What are you talking about? And his point was in basketball, and this is nothing negative about whether it be my former institution or any other school. This is just the reality of the business. If you stay in a program more than 5 years, and that was his rule, you could say 6 or 7, whatever you want to say. But anytime you get past 5 years, at some point, they start to get a little bit tired of you and you start to get a little bit tired of them. And I used to think when he would say that, you're crazy, man. I want to be at this place 30 years. It's not a negative on the institution. It's not a negative on you. It's no different than if your in-laws come for 4 days, cool. If they come for 5 weeks. So that's some advice I would give. And probably last but not least, don't spend your career assuming that when your title changes, everything's going to be gravy. And by that, I mean, I spent most of my 20s and 30s sacrificing big parts of my life trying to get a head coaching job. And I used to joke with my family, well, we had to, when I get a head coaching, we'll do that when I get a head coaching job. I'll go to that event when I get a head coaching job. I'll do this when I get a head coaching job. So those things, just because your title changes, now you just have new problems. They're different than your old problems, but you got to live your life day to day. It can't be, well, when I become a high major assistant, it'll all work out. When I become a head coach, when I, yes, you might make some more money. You might have a cooler title, whatever, but you got to live your life day to day. You can't be so focused on the end goal that you miss the journey. And I think I was guilty of that sometimes, coming up.
Man, Coach, you're hitting so many things right on the head, and that's why you're a better head coach today than you were 7 months ago. That's why we're better head coaches right now, because we're able to have that perspective on exactly what you're talking about. Because we all go through that in transition. And as we've had fun here. We've been on almost an hour and 15 minutes. Just before we leave, just some of the things just to think about, some key terms: professional versus personal identity, over-investing or under-investing in work, core values. Can you describe yourself without mentioning your job title? Discover the passions in which you want to identify yourself with, mentally process your identity in new ways. These are some of the things that we touched on tonight, that spend some time in your quiet time just kind of thinking about these things. Young coaches, you're getting some of these nuggets, man, that you can kind of help you grow. And then everybody else on the call, that's whatever profession you're in, you can use these things to get better on a day-to-day basis. And so, we appreciate you guys tuning in on the second edition of Logos and Polos podcast. We appreciate Coach Fly coming on with us tonight. Look forward to rapping with you guys shortly in the next week or so with our next guest. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope everybody has a great night. Peace.